Hey, welcome back to Well, That's Interesting, the so mind-blowing, it'll make you uncomfortable edition. Today is episode 223, E-Tattoos that function like an EEG, and let's talk about the world's largest known cave, because it's insane. My friends, over the 4.5 years of this show, we've covered an enormous amount of medical discoveries whose technology has produced miracles for individuals with neural injuries or physical disabilities. For example, way the fuck back in 2022, during episode 114, Turning Thoughts into Texts and footwear that helped moonshiners evade cops, that was a thing, we learned for the first time ever, an implanted sensor in the brain can transform imagined words into a visual message that can appear on screen in real time. Just a year later, in episode 161, recreating a pop song using only brainwaves and some black holes burp up after meals, we learned that not only up to half of black holes who chow down on stars eventually, air quote, burp up remains years later, but thanks to the appropriately named Dr. Ludovic Bellier, a neuroscientist and computational researcher at the University of California in Berkeley, his fellow neuroscientists and a bunch of implanted electrodes, thanks to all of this, it is now possible to think of a song, its melody, instruments, its lyrics, all of it, and to translate those brainy electrical impulses into a recognizable tune for the rest of us to hear. Yeah, we heard the thoughts of a patient who in their mind recalled 41 seconds of Another Brick in the Wall by Pink Floyd. We goddamn heard it. And if you haven't heard it, well, you fucking should. It was episode 161. Now, being that these were the first technologies of their kind, you can imagine how bulky they are. Remember when the first cell phones came out, or the first computers? Well, imagine those things, but sticking out of your head. The process to make this technology work is invasive as fuck. I'm talking surgery and wires everywhere. But with time, things begin to shrink. And as they shrink and become easier to implement, boy howdy. On one hand, capitalist ethical nightmares shift from fiction to reality. For example, back in January of last year, during episode 195, why people hear their names being called in the woods and the sounds coming from underneath Pando, I provided an update on the ability to hear thoughts, if you will. Apple submitted a patent application for a new pair of earbuds that are designed as a, quote, biosensing device to measure biological signal parameters from a user, end quote. Theoretically, they act as an EEG, EMG, EOG, and a GSR, all in one. Now, what the fuck are those things? Have a listen to the intro of episode 195 if you already haven't, and you will find out what they want to do. But on the other hand, when technology shrinks in size, there is so much good that can be done. Healthcare, for example, becomes more accessible and affordable with faster results. In the first half of the show, for the first time, scientists have invented a temporary liquid ink that when printed onto a patient's scalp can measure brain activity. And if it sounds like a rub-on tattoo, that acts and replaces an EEG, one of those hairnet-looking things with a dozen or so sensors that fits around your head, it is. This stuff is looking to be a promising alternative to that cumbersome doohickey currently used for monitoring brainwaves and diagnosing neurological conditions. We will meet the team who developed this material. We will talk about the many, many, many difficulties they had to overcome, like hair, and we will get into how it works and what it looks like. Spoiler, really fucking cool. And we will talk about what it means for the future of non-invasive brain-computer interface applications. Ooh. Stuff only used for good, I'm sure. We're only going to talk about the good stuff. Then after the break, something completely different, but just as massive in its own right. Just a few weeks ago, I learned about Vietnam's Hang Son Dang, a cave so large You can squeeze in at least 15 Pyramids of Giza inside it, and you can fly a Boeing 747 through some of its passages. You heard me. It is the world's largest known cave, and we will be climbing into this record-breaking hole. Now, despite being so unfathomably large, it wasn't found until 1991, so we're going to meet the resident of Vietnam who stumbled upon it. We will meet the research team who, when nearly 20 years later after his discovery, heard about it and was like, yo, dude, we need to see this. Take us to your hole. Show us where it is. Yeah, we will get into what they discovered. And then we will meet the next team who ventured into the cave and dove into its waterways to take some new measurements. And y'all, let's just say everyone is just fucking stunned. I'm still stunned. I'm not kidding when I say this is a world unto itself. We will get into it. In the meantime, hi, I'm Jill Chacha. And if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock, my intergalactic business goose. To begin, we're going to head on over to nearly 270,000 square miles Mexico ceded its claim over just a wee 177 years ago, in 1848. They drew the border along the Rio Grande and said good fucking luck to its new home country, which itself was only about 70 years old at the time. My friends, welcome to Texas, a place that has always had, air quotes, border problems, and honestly, looking at those dates, the problem might have been the United States. For many of my fellow geographically challenged Americans whose minds were just blown, get ready. It's about to be blown one more time, for a very different reason. As to why I brought this up, well, it's always nice to have a refresher once in a while. We are at the University of Texas at Austin, where a co-corresponding author of the study we're about to dive into, Nanshu Liu, and her lengthy team of brilliant minds, including Jimin He of the University of California, Los Angeles, were doing what most of us sometimes find ourselves doing. Finding a way to update the cumbersome clusterfuck technology of the EEG and bring it into the 21st century. For you see, my compact business goose, the EEG, or electroencephalography, is an extraordinarily useful medical tool. It's used to diagnose a variety of neurological conditions, including seizures, brain tumors, brain injuries, epilepsy, and sleep disorders. An EEG can also help diagnose Alzheimer's disease, dementia, brain infections, a brain hemorrhage, and even certain central nervous system disorders. The thing is a goddamn goldmine of information for medical professionals who want to help their patients. But there's a catch. Actually, there's like a bunch of catches. During a traditional EEG test, a technician measures a patient's scalp with old-timey rulers, marking over a dozen spots where they'll glue on electrodes, following the international 10-20 system. Now, what the fuck is that? I've got you. Quote, the 10-20 refers to the distances between the adjacent electrodes being 10 or 20% of the total distance of the skull adjusted for the individual head size. End quote, from the team's paper. And this can take up to 2 hours. So far, the accuracy of this EEG test is riding on the technician you're dealt and how much time you've got to spare. Not only that, let's talk about the doohickey itself. Those electrodes are connected to a data collection machine via long wires, and the electrodes themselves send that data through a wet gel that eventually dries out, losing connectivity in a few hours as well. When using that EEG cap, the one that kind of looks like a swimmer's cap, these pick up electrical signals from a large area of the brain, making it difficult to pinpoint the exact source of brain activity. And you still have to use that gel to make sure you've got the optimal signal. So, these are just a few of the pain points Nanshu and the gang were discussing. But luckily, there was already an up-and-coming technology floating around out there that researchers were playing with, all in hopes to replace those caps, reduce the length of these wires, and replace the electrodes themselves. What if we could reimagine the whole damn thing? Enter e-tattoos. My decorated business goose, long story short, the first printed e-tattoo electrodes were developed in 2015 by a team of Italian scientists led by the very Italianly named Francesco Greco. In 2018, the team made a breakthrough by printing conductive polymers onto tattoo paper with an inkjet printer. I ask, do you remember temporary tattoos? Well, the idea is similar here. At the time, these e-tattoos were printed on a thin layer of adhesive material and then applied onto the skin. But, and big ol' but here, they have setbacks too. Like the only place they could be applied is on hairless areas. And so, added to the daunting list of Nanshu's things to fucking do was to create e-tattoos that could handle a little hair. The team, gifted with way more patience than I have, got to work slinging together a variety of ink cocktails like Tommy fucking Cruise until they landed on the perfect Manhattan. And not only did they make a delicious cocktail that ticked off all the boxes on that list, they also found the best way to serve it. Let's get into it. Long, literally 46 letters and 2 numbers short long, the team smashed it. If you need a new recipe to impress that special someone in your life, here you go. Okay, are you ready? Write this down. First, pair poly-3,4-ethylene dioxythiophene with polystyrene sulfonate, and then freeze dry it using liquid nitrogen. This forms what's abbreviated as P.PSS. Okay, now to make the electrode ink, get yourself 11.6 milligrams of sodium chloride, 60 milligrams dried of that P.PSS, and add it to 60 milligrams of glycerol and 2 grams of deionized water. Okay, do you got that so far? Great. Now, to make the interconnect ink, which replaces the wires, add 60 milligrams of dried P.PSS to 60 milligrams of glycerol. Add 120 milligrams of DMSO, which I was too lazy to look up, and add 2 grams of deionized water. Chill all this shit at 4 degrees Celsius or 39 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Jill, shut up and just show me what they made and how it works and how they tested it works. For the love of God. Okay, you got it. My friends, drop whatever cocktail shaker you're holding and pick up your phone. Head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post. What you're going to see are screenshots of a sped-up video that documents the entire e-tattoo process when applied to the scalp of a patient with a buzz cut, and put a pin in that. If you want to see the entire 41-second video yourself, all right, head on over to the tube of you and search Printing Electrodes on a Hairy Scalp, IFL Science. And that video will pop up. What you're going to see is a patient sitting in what reminds me of like one of those massage chairs in malls back in the day. They are face down with their scalp exposed to a mechanical arm. At the end of the arm is a spray gun that will apply that there ink to precise locations. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My trendy business goose. According to the team's press release, titled Temporary Tattoo Printed Directly on the Scalp Offers Easy Hair-Friendly Solution for Measuring Brainwaves, the process begins with a 3D head scan and a printing of 10 electrodes that can be completed within about 15 minutes. What? Yeah, that's a huge difference from 2 hours. They then use a digitally controlled inkjet printer, which, as you can see in those screenshots, looks like a mechanical arm with a spray gun attached to it. That is used to spray a thin circle of temporary e-tattoo ink onto those spots. Now, if you swipe past all those screenshots, you're going to see this Blade Runner-esque final product. And I'm not going to lie, it looks so cool. It is so cool. There are like several black circles on this person's scalp. And the coolest part of all are the black lines running down from the circles to a small box. My friends, these are the printed wires, and they replace the physical wires of an EEG. And quote, this tweak of the e-tattoo ink allowed the printed wires to conduct signals without picking up new signals along the way, end quote, said co-corresponding author Shimin He in that press release. Speaking of accuracy, damn, if you're already impressed by these tattoos, just wait until you hear how well they work. In an experiment, the team printed these e-tattoo electrodes onto the scalps of 5 participants with short hair, the buzz cut you saw in those screenshots. Then, they also attached conventional EEG electrodes next to the e-tattoos. When they compared readings, they found that their performance was about the same. But, and big but here, according to the press release, after 6 hours, the gel on the conventional electrodes started to dry out, leading to over a third of these electrodes failing to pick up any signal. The e-tattoos, however, showed stable connectivity for at least 24 hours. There was no need to reapply. Yes, round of applause, you should do that. Now, the team is triumphant, and they burned their to-do list, and for some reason they're ready to make a new one. The team said that in the future they plan to embed wireless data transmitters in these e-tattoos to achieve a fully wireless EEG process. Like, imagine getting these e-tattoos in the morning and then getting to stay home for multiple readings. They also want to perform more tests to optimize the technology for different hair types. Once they get this shit down, the field of what's called brain-computer interface is going to see some revolutionary changes. One day, there won't be a need for surgery and an internal device in your brain or skull to turn thoughts into texts on a screen in real time, like what we spoke about at the top of the show. All you'll need is a spray-on tattoo. And only good things will come of this, surely. After the break, one day soon you might want to find a hole big enough to crawl inside of to hide from the world, and good news, I found one big enough for all of us. We can fit right in, with room to spare. We're stealing a plane and heading to Vietnam. Stay tuned.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
This episode is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Didn't file with TurboTax last year? That's in the past. Now, Taxes is getting the TurboTax app and filing your own taxes for free if you didn't file with them last year. File by February 18th. All tax forms, all 100% free. Now, this is Taxes. Intuit TurboTax. New filers and filers who didn't use TurboTax last year only must start and file your own taxes in-app by February 18th. Excludes TurboTax Live. Full terms at turbotax.com.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, if you're a long-time listener of this show, then you know we've covered more holes than you can shake a stick at, with each one more gobsmackingly unique than the last. From a toxic hole where the worshippers of Hades and the eunuchs of Sybil brought their animal sacrifices in what is now Western Turkey, to nearly 24 overmassive black holes that were believed to have been formed from clouds. Yes, monstrous, all-caps gargantuan clouds that collapsed in on themselves just after the birth of our universe. It seems like we've covered them all. Well, I'm glad to say we haven't, because stories like the following happen over and over. So join me, will you, in the youthful year of 1991, when what is now Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park and UNESCO World Heritage Site was merely a nature preserve, where, I have to be honest, not much preserving was happening. And before we get into it, for my fellow geographically challenged Americans who may be wondering where in the holy hell this is, I'm so glad you asked. Everyone please imagine China. Thank you. Now, underneath China, I'd like you to draw the unfortunate shape of Florida. Trust me. Go ahead. Perfect. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to divide up that shape into several other countries. At the top is Myanmar, Burma. Below that are neighbors Thailand and Laos, and below them is Cambodia. And finally, at the very end, and resembling a long comma stretching up the east coast, is Vietnam. In the middle of that lanky comma is some of the lushest jungle you're ever going to see. If you give what is now called Phong Nha Ke Bang National Park a Google, you will lose count of the shades of green in those photos that will pop up. Now, like I said, it's 1991, and this ain't no national park. Residents of this rural area make a living by harvesting its resources like agarwood, a valuable timber whose scent and texture make it a commodity for things like incense, perfume, and small hand carvings. Ho Khan was one such resident, and just like many other days before this one, he set out looking for that sweet, sweet agarwood, walking deeper and deeper into this land, hoping to find an untapped section. He did. And good news, it was terrifying. He found himself at the foot of a cave entrance whose size would make God tremble. And from that entrance came the sound of rushing water and a strong wind pushing him back. All signs pointed to get the fuck out of there, and he did. Now, that would be the end of this story if it wasn't for a group of people who, like many members of the flock, can't say no to a good hole. Fast forward to 2008, 17 years later, when the British Cave Research Association rolled into town after hearing about this mostly uncharted area of Vietnam, one rumored to be filled with at least 300 known caves. The team begged the question, what the hell else could be out there? Word got around that the BCRA were poking around for caves, so when someone asked them, hey, have you spoken to Ho? Have you heard about Ho's Hole? Needless to say, they got very excited. Now, I'm sure that's exactly how it happened, because when the team and Ho crossed paths, with Ho retelling his frightening experience, the BCRA knew this was the chance of a lifetime. They begged him, please retrace your steps that one fateful day, 17 years ago, in 1991. Now, for many of us, we have a hard time remembering what we did 17 minutes ago. So this expedition, that I'm calling Operation Ho-Hole, faced a number of setbacks. Like Ho trying to recall where he wandered off to that day. And even when he felt like he was on the right path, after 17 years, the jungle had expanded, taking back more of the land. The odds, however, were eventually in their favor, and the crew found themselves in the very same spot where nearly 2 decades ago, Ho had the instinct to flee. But for Howard Limbert, a well-seasoned British cave explorer and technical director over at Oxalis Adventure, which we will get into, he immediately felt like this hole was going to make history. Telling Sasha Parr of Live Science, quote, "We realized right away that this was major," end quote. My friends, on April 10th, 2009, a year later, Howard and the gang believed they were finally prepared to step into the void. But to be honest, nothing could have prepared them for what no human eyes had ever seen before. It's time. Drop whatever the hell it is you are holding, because it is not as grand, overwhelming, and shocking as the entrance to what is now known as Hang Son Dang. I'm going to need you to pick up your phone. Find WTI on the old social media stuffs and tap on today's post. When you swipe past all those kick-ass, hyper-modern photos of e-tattoos, you are going to see, well, you'll know when you see it. I'll give you a sec. Yeah, my teeny business goose. That is the entrance. And for scale, if you're not impressed, I'm going to need you to look at the lower right-hand corner. Those are tents, and they look like fucking ants. The dimensions of this entrance to what is currently the world's largest cave lives up to the title. I need you to sit the fuck down. Okay, are you ready? This passage, leading to the rest of the staggering cave, is itself 3 miles long, 660 feet tall, and 490 feet wide. The Space Needle in Seattle, Washington, could fit easily next to those tents and have an additional 50 feet of headroom. That is a hole. Now please, pick your jaw off the floor and join me with Howard and the gang, who after jotting down these numbers, carried on, and on, and on. 4 days later, they finished mapping their first ever exploration of Hang Son Dang, and I'm going to drop more number bombs before I tell you how the fuck nature squeezed this one out. Okay, let's talk about the rest of the cave, which runs for another 9 kilometers or 5.6 miles. And boy howdy, it's got some features. The ceiling of the cave is punctured by 2 sinkholes, and they're not fucking around. The size of the openings has allowed for enough light and pollination to take place that inside this cave are 2 entire forests, separate from the national park. And if you swipe past the photos of the entrance, you'll see one of them just bathing under the skylight/sinkhole. It looks heavenly. And good news, it doesn't stop there. There is an extraordinary corridor called the Fossil Passage, and a section of that passage is nicknamed Watch Out for Dinosaurs. And I bet you're thinking, well, it must be because it's big enough to house a fucking dinosaur, and there must be fossils. If you're thinking that, you are absolutely right. But there's more. Swipe past the forest, and you'll see what looks like an aerial view of someone chilling on a hill overlooking a canyon. It's not. That person is inside Hang Son Dang, and that person is standing on one of the world's largest stalagmites. It's a monster of a pillar, lovingly called the Hand of Dog, and it measures 260 feet or 80 meters high. Now, as for fossils, every now and then you might find yourself tripping over the remains of sea creatures that once inhabited an ancient sea here in what is now central Vietnam. Beyond this graveyard is the Pastchen Daly Passage. Okay, Pastchen Daly. Sounds about right. It was named after a World War I battle called Pastchen Daly, where soldiers fought in just like horrific conditions and mud-filled trenches. It was awful. You know the one. This is what came to mind when Howard and the rest of the BCRA team found themselves waist-deep in mud themselves, just venturing into the unknown. And yeah, they survived, but holy hell, what they saw were too many other massive stalagmites and geological features to count. As to where this mud came from, so far in, well, during the rainy season, and thanks to those exposed sinkholes, this exact area floods and transforms into a huge turquoise green lake. And yeah, I have a photo. You need to take a look. It'll make your day. It's like a surrealist painting. Okay, let me snap you out of that dream and get us back to 2009, when the team struggled their way out of that scene from like the never-ending story. We all know the one, don't talk about it. They made it out of the passage only to hit a wall. Literally. They were rewarded with a fucking wall they were not prepared to climb. What is now known as the Great Wall of Vietnam stood before them. 300 vertical feet of slick calcite, and for my fellow Americans, just imagine a football field standing on its end zone. If that doesn't help, drop in one Statue of Liberty instead. Yeah, it was a dead end for now. When Howard and the gang returned to the surface, emerging from what probably felt like a fever dream, they traversed through 1.35 billion cubic feet, which, like I said at the top of the show, is spacious enough to fit nearly 15 Great Pyramids of Giza. So, how in the fuck was this thing made? I'm glad you asked. Long, 400 million year long story short, when the compressed shells and skeletons of ancient sea animals that perished naturally, and finally, when the sea here evaporated, and all of it accumulated, it formed the biggest limestone mass in Asia. 2 local rivers, the Rao Thong and the Ki Rai, which I'm sure I said perfectly, they had nothing but time to find their way through cracks in that limestone and to erode the rock and form these horrifying yet impressive formations. Hang Son Dang roughly translates to mountain river cave. And it turns out that the name is way more fucking apt than anyone expected. I have excellent news. I have great news, everyone. Remember when I said the world's largest cave is about 1.35 billion cubic feet? I lied. The story doesn't end here. And that's thanks to a group of people who not only can't say no to a good hole, but to a good spelunking as well. Please join me, will you, in the year no one remembers, 2019, where we are back at the entrance to Hang Son Dang, once again with Howard, but this time accompanied by 3 new British explorers, Jason Mallison, Rick Stanton, and Chris Jewell. Now, if any of their names sound familiar to you, hold on to your quivering cheeks. They were the same guys who aided in the rescue of the trapped soccer team in Thailand in 2018. Same dudes. When the trio found themselves with some time off a year later, Howard approached them with a great way to relax. Quote, "The divers did an amazing job rescuing the children in Thailand, so we invited them on a trip to Son Dang to thank them for their great effort. They wanted to do something interesting during the trip, so we came up with the idea of diving Son Dang, which had never been done before." End quote. Howard told Kate Springer of CNN. So yeah, on their time off, they decided to explore the underbelly of the world's largest cave, underwater, with no map, just general good vibes. My friends, thanks to dye tracing, we know that the waters from Hang Son Dang eventually meander to a nearby cave called Hang Thong. But no one has ever squeezed their body through any possible connecting passages. This was about to change. From that CNN interview, quote, "During the mission, divers were able to reach a depth of about 78 meters, or 256 feet, while diving on air before turning around. When the divers reached 78 meters, they plumbed the depth below using a line and a lead weight. Hence, they believe the offshoot reaches a depth of 120 meters, or 393 feet, and continues for about a kilometer or half a mile," explained Howard. The team wasn't expecting the tunnels to be so deep because the other caves in the area are quite shallow. Now that we know how deep it is, we'll bring special gases like an oxygen-helium mixture with us next time to enable long, deep dives. End quote, added Howard. God, my quivering business goose, as above, so below. Hang Son Dang is deep as fuck. And it was also confirmed that yes, the 2 caves are connected. This means, after all the new clickety-clack calculations, this adds another horrifying 57 million cubic feet to the cave's volume, or a mere 2/3 of a Pyramid of Giza. Quote, "It would be like if someone had found a lump on the top of Mount Everest, making it another 1,000 meters, or 3,300 feet higher." End quote, Howard told Life Science. Quote, "Any cave in the world would be able to fit comfortably inside Hang Son Dang when it's connected. It's just outrageous in size." End quote. Yes, it is. Now, if at any point during this episode you said, "By golly, I'd love to see this place myself," and feel the terror of walking through a cave so big that you could fit a New York City block with 40-story skyscrapers inside it, you can. Yeah. In early August 2013, the first tourist group explored the cave on a guided tour at a cost of $3,000 each, and guess who guided them all? Howard. Yeah, Howard himself, and, drumroll please, Ho. That's fucking right, the band is back together, and leading absolutely mind-blowing tours of Hang Son Dang. I'm talking day tours, overnight tours, multi-fucking day tours, and if you so fancy, you could retrace the steps of the OG BCRA. You can do it with friends. Or, I shit you not, you can do it as a team-building exercise. That's an option that's offered. You can bring your coworkers. head on over to oxalisadventure.com. That's OXALIS adventure.com, and behold the incredible job Howard and the gang has done making Sundang accessible. Book a package. Tell them I sent you. Oh, but heads up, by the way, after August, heavy rains cause the rivers to flood and the levels to rise, and pretty much it's a death trap, so go between January and August. Just a heads up. And thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, telling your friends about the cool EEG, E-tattoos, just the good stuff. Don't talk about the bad stuff, because that's never going to happen. And then shimmy into the conversation about the world's largest cave. Just drop some facts. I don't know. One is more horrifying than the other, but they're equally horrifying. Anyway, a huge hole of a thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you love the other podcasts in this family. And please, stay interesting.